Sara, you've had an extraordinary career. You have interviewed the Taliban in Pakistan. You've been to the bottom of the Atlantic where the Titanic sank. You have been to Sudan and Somalia and reported on famines as a network reporter and correspondent. And yet, I know that it hasn't been just all glamour in your life, because you've certainly had your share of curveballs too. And one of the big ones was when your second daughter was born. So can you just share with me a little bit about that experience, having a daughter that was born ultimately with, a disability, as you discovered, and how that changed things and how you handled it and what you learned along the way?
Well, I often compare it to when you're on a plane and everything is going well and you're at that comfortable cruising altitude, and you never want it to happen that you hear the pilot get on the loudspeaker and say, well, you may have noticed we're descending and we're nowhere near the airport. This has actually happened to me, by the way. And we're going to be landing in an airport. It's going to be fine, but we're not landing where you thought you were going to land. And I think that was what it was like, that moment where I knew exactly where we were going. We had our daughter's name picked out. We knew where her room was going to be. We just moved apartments to have more room.
You were living in Manhattan?
We were living in Manhattan, and we had a really pretty apartment, and we moved to another one with more space, and I had it all pictured. And then when she was born, we landed at a different place. And when she was just 24 hours old and in my arms, she wasn't nursing. And I called the nurse in and I said, what's going on? She's not feeding. And within a couple of days, she was in intensive care, and they told us that she'd had a seizure. And that was the biggest curveball of my life.
So in that moment of just discovering that you've landed in a very different place than where you thought, what did you do to pick yourself up?
I think it's so important to have people you love around you, and that's what you draw on. You draw on, in my case, my husband, our older daughter, even though she was only 3.5 at the time, seeing her bright, sweet little face as she came down the hospital corridor. When I looked at her, I just thought, we'll get there. We'll get there for us, and we'll get there for you and the rest of my extended family. But in addition to that, I think for me, I believe in emotional muscle. I believe in the fact that over time, when things go wrong, it actually makes us stronger. So that all the times when little things had gone wrong before, without knowing it, I'd been building this emotional muscle. And so without knowing it, I was stronger than I knew. All the brain studies show us that when our muscles fatigue, it's really more our mind. And that's the part where we need that strength. So I was calling on every single bit of that I had. But I often think you don't fail when there's really no way you can fail. What can you do? You have to go forward. And you've got this cute little kid looking up at you saying, what are you going to do?
Yeah, but it's funny, there's that saying, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. But the truth is that some people, when they land in a place they didn't think, that life doesn't go to plan and things fall apart, they can fall apart. Not everybody rises to the occasion.
And you know what? I think that everybody has moments of falling apart. And I don't think that's wrong. In other words, I don't tell everybody every time I walk out of the room, go into my bedroom and throw myself on the bed and cry. You know what? I think that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think if we kind of kid each other and ourselves that we're all strong all the time, I think that's kind of sending the wrong message. Because I know I'm not always. I know I have those moments. And I call up my girlfriends and, and but then I do think that the muscle that you've built over time and the fact that you've gotten through things before, and honestly, being a reporter, I think for me, that's part of it. Because I have been in places where I've seen devastation that I cannot imagine. And I have seen people endure things I would never imagine being able to endure. So I was always able to put what was happening to us in perspective, in this big frame, of what happens to lots of people.
And I think that is really powerful, being able to reframe. And I know myself, it's those adversities, those things when life doesn't go to plan. Sometimes they're small, but they do build up our tolerance for and our capacity for handling life.
Yeah.
And you know, as you know, in Brave, my book that you've read,
I love your book.
and thank you, and you wrote a wonderful endorsement for it. But you know, I talk about training the brave. You know, the more often we act bravely, it is like a muscle that even in small things, it builds us. It builds our courage for the times when we really need a lot of courage.
You know, it's interesting because I've gotten the opportunity to interview over the course of my career people in the military, people training as astronauts, people in all different walks of life. And what I have discovered with some of those people who routinely, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, flying with an F-15 Strike Eagle pilot. You know, these are people who are doing stuff that
bold,
really
scary.
Yeah, should read your book. Except maybe
No,
they have to write your
need
book.
to read the book.
So these guys. So I'm like, well, how do they do what they do? They train. And what you do is you actually overlay, I think, those times where you're going to wimp it with this knowledge that, you know what, you go through the checklist, you do what you need to do. And for me, it's honest to goodness, I was there in the hospital with my notepad and my pen and my phone, and I went to reporter mode.
Yeah.
And that's my comfort zone.
That's your skill set. You know, you're good at that.
Exactly. And, you know, I think for all of us, everybody has that skill set. They have that thing that they do well, that's what you should go to. And you go to ground with your thing that makes you feel confident. And also, the other thing I would say is I definitely learned, and I've interviewed a lot of doctors, and I love doctors. I love medicine. I love medical stories. And suddenly I was like, I love it better from the outside. Not so cool on the inside. But, you know, it's hard when you're going through it. But even I was deferential sometimes to my detriment. In other words, you have to ask questions.
Yeah.
That didn't last that long. But soon, when things are going really poorly, you need to trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Any great doctor will tell you that.
Yeah.
And
even if that means challenging them.
And you will have to challenge.
Yeah.
You will have to challenge. It will come to that.
Yeah.
You can do it nicely.
Yeah.
But you've got to do it. And you've just got to go, I must do this. This is necessary. And there are people counting on me.